because essentially the gross, dirty old carpet was our, um, what's the word? Welcome to Kira Gets Real Estate. I am Kira Witherwax, team leader of the Kira Witherwax team at Remax North Country, and I am so glad you're here, watching or listening or both. We're going to answer some questions from our viewers about real estate, and then I'm also going to chime in and give some information that goes along with what they asked, right? Because sometimes you have a question, but most of the time you don't know what you don't know. So often you don't have, I don't want to say the right questions. Any questions are the right questions, but you don't necessarily have all the information to ask the questions to get the answers you actually need. So sometimes I'll add in some more information that might be useful. My caveat is that I am not an attorney. I am not an accountant. I can't give you legal or tax advice. And if you're working with an agent, which means you have signed a listing agreement or you have signed a buyer compensation agreement, that means that you are working with an agent. And I cannot give you specific advice to your situation because that would be interfering with an agency relationship. So that being said, let's get to our first question. Our first question is, what credit score do I need to buy a home? And while this is a great question, it's not really a Kira question. It is a lender question. However, our job as real estate professionals are typically to guide you and connect you with the people that you're going to need. Most of what I do is acting as a liaison to put the right people in the right places to get the end result that you're looking for. So credit related questions really are for your lender because it depends on the type of mortgage you're trying to get. Different mortgage options have different requirements, right? So there are options for people with great credit that maybe have a better interest rate or some other perks because their credit is so high. And there's also options for people that don't have as good of credit to get them into a home for their starter home or whatever the case may be. So there's a range, and that's definitely something you should talk with your lender about. And if they say where your credit is right now isn't going to work for any of the products we offer, that doesn't mean no forever. That's just a not right now. And I highly encourage you to ask what you would need to do to get your credit in a place that they could say yes, because that's what they want too, right? They want to help you in your home journey. And so sometimes it's a matter of, pay off these things or work on this for 6 months or whatever the case may be. They often can give you really good advice on what you would need to do to get your credit in a place that they can say yes and you can move forward and purchase a home. What is the difference between pre-qualified and pre-approved? This is one of those things that I get a little bit different answer depending on the lender. It's, one of those internal language things, I think. And that's fine. You just want to ask what it means to them. In my mind, lenders out there, be kind or give us your feedback, right? Please tell us what you think. But pre-qualification is a little bit less of a step than pre-approval. So pre-qualification is they ask you a bunch of information. You tell them, they may do a soft credit pull that doesn't impact your credit score, just to have a general idea, but mostly they're going by the information that you tell them, which is sometimes fine, right? And sometimes lacking because often potential buyers don't know the important information to share, or they're a little embarrassed and don't want to share it. So either of those scenarios make it where the lender doesn't have a full picture. For example, if you've declared bankruptcy in the past, or if you have some kind of debt that they may not see right away, the information that you're providing needs to be as transparent as possible. If you're going through a divorce, if you are about to buy a vehicle, anything that you can provide, they're going to find out eventually anyway. It's just better to be upfront and be like, here's my whole slew of financial information, because that helps them to better help you, right? And so if you get pre-qualified and don't share all of the information they may need, what generally happens is down the road, they say, yeah, sorry, we can't approve you. And then you might be out a home inspection cost. You may have incurred some expenses. Certainly, you're going to have a very frustrated seller if you made an offer on a house and went under contract and now can't get approved. So it's just easier for everybody if we know the full picture going into it. Pre-approved generally means that they have run your credit check. They have seen your bank statements. They have seen your pay stubs, right? They have not just your say so, but they've done a little more digging to get confirmation of what is actually there. Either way, that is a picture of you and your credit worthiness and financial situation. It isn't a reflection of the house. Sometimes I'll have sellers actually question, kind of why the financing takes as long as it does if somebody is pre-approved. And part of that is because it's a process with multiple people involved and, they have people in front of you in line. But part of it is because as much as the lender can get a good solid picture in advance of the borrower, it is also dependent on the house. So there are certain loan types that have certain requirements regarding the house. And the borrower, they could say, okay, you're pre-qualified or pre-approved for up to $300,000. But when they're making that decision, they are determining it on a monthly basis. So the debt to income ratio for the borrower per month, which means if you buy a house that has higher taxes than they estimated, it may affect it, which is why they can't give you exact numbers and why they will have to rerun things once you know which house you're looking to pursue. So this is not a question from a viewer, but it's just really important for you to have this information since we're talking about buyers and getting pre-qualified. Please do not buy anything new. Do not get any new credit. Do not change your financial situation in any way prior to closing. We've had situations where a buyer goes out and furnishes their new home on a credit card and then can't close. That is a disaster, right? Because if you put a bunch of money on a credit card, that changes your financial situation. That changes your debt to income ratio, even things that aren't necessarily debt. Like if do not deposit a pile of cash in your account 2 weeks before closing. Cash has to be traceable. And so that requires more work on the lender's part to make sure that they know where it came from, that it's a lawful source, that it just creates unnecessary headaches. So if you are thinking of doing anything that you haven't been doing for the last 3 months in your financial situation, talk to your lender, say, hey, if I buy this truck, if I pay off this card, if I, get a new credit card, if I buy $10,000 worth of furniture, how will it affect everything? And I think people often think of like, if I get a new job or something major, but they don't always think of the smaller things that can be really big things as well. But certainly do not get a new job without talking to your lender, because having consistent income history and future income is incredibly important to the borrowing process. So just be completely open and ask questions when it comes to anything regarding your finances, and especially if after you're under contract, so that you don't accidentally jeopardize your closing. This question, and it's going to be a lengthy answer. What happens if multiple buyers make offers on the same property? This happens all the time. There's many different scenarios, basically. So from a seller's perspective, if they receive an offer from one party and then are either told they're getting another offer or do receive another offer, they are not required to tell anyone. They are only required to disclose to other potential buyers through their agents if they accept an offer. Say 123 Main Street, they have a bunch of showings, somebody makes an offer and a buyer sees it and says, oh my gosh, I love it. I need to wait 5 days to get pre-qualified. I'll make an offer after. They could get 6 more offers in there and you would never know it. They don't have to tell you unless they've already accepted an offer. If they've accepted an offer, they have to disclose that to you. But what often happens, because often it's in the seller's best interest, is their agent may say, we have 2 offers. We're expecting 2 more. The seller is asking for best and final offers Friday at 5:00. Or, we have an offer and then they reach out to all the buyer's agents that have shown it in the past week. Does anybody else expect to get one? All of those things are the seller's decision. They determine the plan, right? Now they of course do it with the advice of their agent. So they will, a seller will say to me, what do you think we should do? Right. And sometimes they listen to me, sometimes they don't. Sometimes I say, here are your options. I'm not sure. We can't predict always what other people will do. So sometimes in a situation, you could tell other buyers that you have an offer, hoping that that makes them feel a sense of urgency that they want to make one too, maybe come in a little higher. And what actually happens is they say, never mind, I don't want to fight over it. We are starting to see that more and more in our market. There's always that risk, right? So maybe having not told them in that situation would have had a better result, or maybe it wouldn't. We don't know. But as a buyer going into a multiple offer situation or looking at houses, just know that if you like a house and want to make an offer, you shouldn't wait because you might not be given the chance to make an offer if someone else does. Sometimes buyers will say, well, I didn't even have a chance. They didn't give me a chance. And it's like, well, yeah, you did. You had a chance. It was on the market. It was available. Sometimes it was available for 5 weeks. That was your chance. They are not obligated to give you any information other than it's available or it's under contract. If it's a house that you really want, don't wait. Make the offer that you're most comfortable with, that you won't feel sad if you win, right? That's a really good indication on if you are comfortable with the offer. If you win, are you going to feel a little bit disappointed that you're paying that much? If so, do not make that offer because it's a big decision. It's a large purchase and generally comes with a 30-year commitment, even though you can sell it. So that is important to think about when you're considering an offer that you might want to make. But from a buyer's perspective, you could be in a multiple offer situation and not know it. Our next question is, how long does the home buying process take? So the home buying process, in terms of how long does it take to close after you are under contract on a house, is typically 8 to 10 weeks. That includes when you're getting a mortgage, right? So if you have financing involved as a contingency of the purchase, which most buyers in our market do, it's about 8 to 10 weeks. If you are purchasing a property with cash, then it might be 5 to 6 weeks, sometimes a little faster, but typically we're looking at a few months. Now, I'm not sure if they were asking the home buying process from like start to finish, looking to moving in. That range could be, 4 months to 5 years, depending on what you're looking for, what your budget is, how ready you are, all of the things. I would say typically buyers that I'm working with, it tends to be about 6 to 18 months. Often buyers come to me when they're in the very beginning stages of looking and want to have a buyer consult and, have questions, and which I love. That's fantastic. And I love getting to meet people at the beginning of their journey and kind of help them through the process and answer their questions and everything because of that, because I'm getting in their lives early in their decision making process, then it does tend to be more on the longer end because they're just getting started. Sometimes I get people that are like, I'm pre-qualified already. Our landlord is selling where we're living. We need to find a house in the next 2 months. Sometimes that happens, right? So it is a wide range. What is a home inspection and should I attend? I love this question because yes, you should attend if you can. But here's why. So a home inspection is not required by anyone. It's not required by your lender. It's not required by law or code enforcement or anything. And in our market, you typically have 10 days after you get your offer accepted to have any inspections you want. The home inspection, when we say that, typically we are referring to kind of the general home inspection that is the biggest overview of everything. They're checking heat and electrical and plumbing, foundation, but they're generally not checking like a full septic inspection. They can do pieces of it, like they can do a dye test where they put dye, like flush it through a toilet and see if they see the dye come out like in the yard, which is not good. They can do a water test. So they can take a water sample. They take it to a different company that actually processes it. But if you have like a private well or private septic, those are things that you would want to inquire about and also potentially have a secondary inspection, like a full septic inspection by another company. But for a general home inspection, I definitely would recommend you have one always. But what it does is it just really gives you an overview, and they will flag many things. It is very detailed. You will get a very extensive report. And many of the things are, just good to know, maybe a to-do list for your first couple years of ownership, some things may be flagged as dangerous or immediate concern. And those you might want to ask the seller to take care of or ask for money so that you can take care of them. Or, maybe you're getting such a great deal on the house that you already planned to do those yourself. And that's fine. And just because it's like a safety item or an immediate item doesn't necessarily mean it's a big ticket item. One thing that often scares buyers is electrical, which is valid, right? But often they are pleasantly surprised about what the cost might be to correct those issues. Often it's way below what they're thinking, which is wonderful. So just because it's like a big red flag doesn't mean it's a giant cost. It just means you should do it. The home inspector also may flag things that they say you should have someone else look at. They kind of give you the overview, and then they may say, there's something happening with this foundation. You should have a foundation person look at it. Or, there's an electrical thing here that I'm not sure if that's okay. You should have an electrician look at it. So they do sometimes flag things for further inspection if it's a more specific issue that you would need someone to take a look at. So the overall home inspection does generally take 3 to 4 hours. It is very extensive and that's good, right? You want to know what's going on with the house. Obviously, there are things that they can't see. They're not ripping open walls. They're not digging into the outside of the foundation. Is it possible that you might have an issue after you close that they didn't tell you about? Absolutely. There's nothing they can do about that. They're not allowed to destroy the house to find out, right? But overall, it's great to get their report, their eyes on things. In terms of if you should code the inspection, yes, absolutely, if you're able to. So, like I said, it's about 3 to 4 hours. So, what I always do with my buyers is I ask the inspector, what time do you expect to be wrapping up? Because certainly it depends on the size of the house and to some degree the condition of the house. So, if they say, okay, I'm starting at 9, I expect to be wrapping up around 12:30. So then I say to my buyers, let's meet there around 12. And that way you can hear the summary directly from the inspector. They can point things out to you. So they will walk around the outside of the house, walk around the inside of the house, let us know of the things that they found that you would want to see in person, which is great. And they can answer your questions, which is so fantastic. However, keep in mind, you will still get a very extensive report that has all the information they just told you and more with photos. So that's good. And definitely hire an inspector that is willing to answer your questions afterwards. So say your work schedule doesn't allow for you to be there, you'll get this extensive report, which can be very overwhelming. You're going to want to look it over, process, and give them a call, because having it be a conversation and getting your questions answered makes it much more easy to understand versus just looking at this overwhelming report. Sometimes I'll have buyers that want to be there for the whole time. Here is why I highly discourage you from doing that. A, if you're there the whole time, I have to be there the whole time because the seller does not want you wandering around their house for 3 to 4 hours. And that's valid because you're not going to follow the inspector around the whole time. You think you are, but an inspection is incredibly boring. What happens is buyers start out by following the inspector around, which I can't even imagine how they say it's not annoying, but that would drive me nuts. So you start out by following the inspector around, and about 30 minutes in, you're like, okay, I don't like what I'm just going to stand here while he checks this outlet and does this and does that, right? It's incredibly boring. And so they start to wonder. They're like, oh, right, I wanted to see if the primary bathroom had this in it, or oh, I wanted to check out that room again, right? And the inspector can't be with you like your agent would be if you were at a showing. Your tendency is to wander off. And it's not that you're a bad person, but that is what happens. That's why your agent has to be there if you're there, because there's nothing for you to do. We're sort of babysitting you. That's just the reality of it. I'm sorry. You're not missing out on anything by not being there for the whole time. I think that's the important takeaway is you still will get all of the information. If you show up at the end, the inspector will take 30 minutes with you and show you what he found, and you will have just as much opportunity to get your questions answered. You're not missing something by not being there for the whole time. So I highly encourage you to show up at the end. It will also be faster. It will be faster if he's able to do the inspection without a shadow. But, if my buyer really, 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 really wants to be there, then I will be there with them. I've certainly done that. And generally, what happens is they're like, oh, yeah, I don't really need to be here. And since we had a question about home inspection, I do also just want to touch on this. What is the difference between a home inspection and an appraisal? And when I say it like that, you're probably like, well, obviously, they're not the same thing. However, lenders specifically, and appraisers actually, often use the word inspection when talking about the appraisal, which confuses the heck out of everybody. Because I guess in their mind, the appraiser is inspecting the property, but it's different. It's a different thing. They're there for a different reason. And so if your lender says inspection or your appraiser says inspection, keep in mind they're probably talking about the appraisal or ask your agent. But so the home inspection is for your knowledge. No one requires it. No one gets a copy. It's just for you. It can be used in negotiating between you and the seller. And in that situation, you would provide the seller with it, but it doesn't go beyond that. However, the appraisal is done typically because the lender requires it. You can make an offer contingent on an appraisal that doesn't have financing involved. You know, when our market was like absolutely bonkers in 2021, I did have a couple buyers do that. They were cash buyers, but they were concerned about overpaying. And so they made it contingent on an appraisal, even though it was cash. And so in that situation, they had to pay for it. Well, I guess either way, buyers paying for it, but it wasn't part of their required things. They just chose to have one for their peace of mind. That's fine. But typically, an appraisal is done because the lender requires it. The buyer still pays for it, but it is for the lender and it is to protect the lender. It protects the lender because they want to make sure that the asset they're buying is worth what you're paying with their money. It also protects you for the same reason, right? They don't want to lend you more than it's worth. You don't want to pay more than it's worth. So there's some alignment there. But then depending on what type of mortgage you're getting, it may be more than just value. So typically, if you're getting a conventional mortgage with 20% down, they're mostly just looking at, do the comparable sales warrant the price this buyer is paying? And they will come up with a price based on sales, based on the property, and say, okay, this is the value that we're giving the property. When it's a conventional mortgage with less than 20% down or one of the government loans, then you have private mortgage insurance if it's less than 20% down payment. And private mortgage insurance has some additional requirements for the condition of the house because a private mortgage insurance protects the lender, you pay for it, but it bridges the gap for the lender in terms of the value of the property because they're lending more than 80% of the value. There's more risk of foreclosure. And if it goes into foreclosure, will they get the money that they have into it? So that's what private mortgage insurance does. And so in order to qualify for private mortgage insurance or PMI, you have to meet some additional requirements. Like if you had possibly a side of the house that wasn't sided at all, or um, a deck that was really falling off, that could become an issue. It might not meet PMI requirements, and therefore the lender would not lend on it. Government loans have some additional, more stringent rules as well. So if you're getting a VA loan or an FHA loan or a USDA loan, those are even more stringent on the house. And so, sometimes we'll see where you have to have the chipping and peeling paint around the windows touched up. It can be extensive if there are a lot of things not up to date on the house. And so your agent can kind of give you an idea going into it if they think this house will pass like a FHA appraisal, for example. None of us can tell you for sure, which is certainly frustrating because ultimately it comes down to the opinion of the appraiser. And so we don't know until that appraiser accepts the job because we wouldn't know at the beginning who the appraiser is going to be. And then once they go to the property. So that could be a little nerve wracking, but certainly, your agent is going to know, hey, this property definitely is not going to go FHA, or I think so. If something's flagged, we will deal with it, because the good news is if the appraiser flags something, they literally give you a list of what you have to do for it to qualify. So they may say, yes, it meets the value, but we need a railing here. We need these windowsills scraped and painted, and we need this broken window replaced, right? So then you're like, okay, well, we know exactly what we need to do now to get it to pass the appraisal. At that point in the transaction, both parties are usually pretty willing to make it work because now they know if we get this done, these things, we're going to close. And so that's pretty motivating for most people, and it usually works out. Next question. What should I do immediately after closing? Which I love this question because that's not one I'm asked very often. Change the locks. Definitely, like, as quickly as possible. Change the locks. It's not that I think, the sellers are going to try to go back in the house. It's just that in the small towns that we live in, lots of people have keys to lots of people's houses. Like, you don't know who is out there in the North Country with a key to your house. That's just the truth. For your peace of mind and your safety, I would absolutely recommend that you change the locks. Second, plan on cleaning, whether that's going to be yourself or that's going to be hiring a cleaning company, however you want to do it. The way our local contract reads is the house has to be broom swept. So it's not to the level of clean that most people want to move into. It's not like an apartment where you're supposed to have it really clean. It's just not supposed to be dirty. I don't know, is kind of the, I guess, way to describe broom swept, right? So the floors are swept, but they're not like mopped, and the cabinets are not gross, but you might want to clean them before you go move in. So I would just plan on that, right? So if you're closing on a Thursday, say, okay, I'm going to take the day off on Friday, or I'm going to plan on cleaning this weekend, and then we're going to move in. The other thing that I would always recommend, because lots of times people plan on doing either some updates or even just like painting. It doesn't necessarily have to be big updates, but oftentimes people want to paint. If at all possible, plan to do that before you move in, because it is just so much easier to paint an empty room instead of painting and moving your stuff all around, right? If you aren't able to do that, if you like, because of your lease, whatever the situation may be, if you're not able to wait to move in, consider like, okay, maybe putting most of the things in the garage. And then as you paint a room, move the stuff in. It really will just make your life easier. And definitely had this happen personally. Our first house was completely hideous and had carpet that I would not walk in without shoes. And we painted every room before we changed the flooring. Essentially, the old gross carpet was just protecting the floors from the paint. So we didn't have to put like a drop cloth down. We just used the carpet. And then after we painted every room, we then had the flooring replaced. So if you are in a position that you can do that, that is my recommendation. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you learned something. And I hope maybe it jogged your mind for some other questions that you may have. So if you have any real estate related questions, whether it's about the market, whether it's about buying or selling, or if you want to sell in 5 years, or should I paint this room this color, I would love to hear them and answer them on air. So if you go to KiraWitherwax.com and go to the podcast, there is a spot for you to submit your questions. So please do that and share with your friends. And I hope you have a great day.